August 9th, 2023. When I get back to the ongoing saga in the Ukraine war, there's been a lot of things developing along a sort of a different line. As far as the actual front, it's just been more of the same. I don't think there's been a variety of Ukrainian assaults and actually some Russian assaults. Their northern operation seems to have kicked back into gear again, and they've taken some more ground there. And then there's areas where I think basically the Russians have been gaining more ground in the last week than the Ukrainians have. Um, but the Ukrainians are still launching various assaults and then being faced with counter moves. Very recently, there's been an attempt that just happened um, for the Ukrainians to cross the Dnieper River and to try to develop a little beachhead on the Russian occupied side, and I guess that battle is still probably going on as I record this. So I don't know how the outcome will be. I suspect that they just found a weak spot in the Russian defenses, and probably it'll take a little while for the Russians to redeploy some troops and counterattack. This also could be somewhat of a diversion to draw troops from the Zaporizhia front down there, maybe, or some reserves, and maybe the Ukrainians are planning to launch another, roll the dice attack up in the north. Ever so often they've been launching. In the last couple of weeks, they've launched a few bigger attacks, some real, take some risk kind of attacks, and so they may be ready to roll the dice again and see what they can do. So that's certainly in play there, and so we'll continue to monitor that. Otherwise, like I say, that in the northern area, in the Luhansk offensive, the Russians kind of stalled out for last week, but this week they're going back into action again, taking some ground, and some other areas along the front. I don't think a whole lot's happened in the Bakhmut area lately that's been successful. There was a failed Ukrainian attack on the northern area. Um, the south, which had been the main offense area, seems to have died down for the moment. However, the evidence has been shown that the Russians are building defensive trenches further back, I guess, against the possibility that they'll fail to hold that front and that we discussed previously, and they'll have to fall back. So they're building defenses there to hold the line if necessary, although they haven't proven to be necessary yet. But if you like these videos, please give me a like, and if you haven't subscribed, if you haven't already, thanks to the person that subscribed last week. We have another one now. We're slowly gaining, so that's kind of the picture on the front. However, other areas are kind of more interesting, I think, that are happening. Basically, one thing on the naval area, Ukraine has now responded to the Russian effort to cut off the grain shipments by launching a naval drone attack on a Russian naval vessel in harbor, and also on a tanker that was coming through the Kerch Strait. So, and they basically declared their own kind of blockade. That is to say, I guess if anybody ships into Russia through the Black Sea, Ukraine is willing to send one of those speedboats with half a ton of explosives on them and try to blow you up. So, and these are kind of, I guess, as far as I can tell, they're remotely controlled. So I presume that they require to have some kind of communication from either a drone or a ground station or a satellite. I don't know exactly how they're being controlled. They have to have telemetry to control this thing, because they're basically have a camera and they take a picture of it going in for the hit. So I assume that's how they guide it also from a remote site. And so far the Russians haven't found a way to disrupt this. Although it would seem to me their jamming techniques would be applicable to this, and certainly a warship, or even could definitely house the kind of equipment necessary. So I don't know, that probably they're just an area they haven't really focused that much on, but the bridge attack and some of these attacks on vessels may lead to some different developments. We'll see what happens there. But for the moment, I guess the insurance rates on shipping anything through the Black Sea to Russia have gone up to unacceptable. So we'll have to see. That's another development. A score one for Ukraine, I guess. A week or two ago, we could scored one for Russia, so this time we score one for Ukraine. The tit for tat continues. Otherwise, I guess the drone war is still the big factor, and Russians are using a lot of air power, particularly in the Kherson region, doing this guide bomb technique, and I suspect that'll be what will happen in the area where this crossing just occurred. Also, there some commentators have made the comment like that Larry Johnson that's on the Judge Napolitano show mentioned this, that the Russians have kind of freedom to use their air force throughout Ukraine. I think they could do it, but I have not seen the evidence of really doing tactical air in there. I think there's still enough air defense that they may be a little nervous about just flying fighter bombers, deep into Ukraine, because there's still some although air defense isn't what it was, there's still a little bit left, but they definitely are flying along the edges and then doing this toss bombing or glide bomb tactics. They apparently have something analogous to our either the JDAM or maybe some other kind of guidance system. I'm not sure what they're using for guidance, and they seem to be able to do some damage with those. And of course, they've the ongoing attacks on Moscow with some small drones that do a little bit of damage, and Russia fires back a lot of bombardment, like 100 missiles during this last week's attack in response. By the way, the Ukrainians then previously launched a cluster bomb attack, a cluster shell attack on the civilian area in Damatsk, I guess you pronounce it, which is kind of the capital of that area, which was a civilian area. It wasn't a military target. So they can, both sides, let's face it, neither side is clean about that. Just a fact. The idea of portraying one as the angel and the other as the devil is wrong. They're both kind of a little devilish, you know what I mean? And of course, that missile attack, apparently an apartment building was hit with a couple of missiles, and the 8 people were killed. And of course, there was a big thing on the press there about that. But I point out that during the Iraq War, we had far bigger collateral casualties. In one case, we bombed a bomb shelter and killed 100 people, civilians. Another, I'm not talking about a military command bunker either. That's what we thought it was, but it wasn't. Another time, we bombed a restaurant and killed a whole bunch of people because we thought Saddam was hiding in it, but he wasn't. So, I mean, that's just a couple instances I can think of. So they're trying to, I don't think Russia's spending $1 million plus, and this was one of their hypersonic missiles. If in fact that was what actually hit the building, they might have brought in the wreckage of that. They're very propagandistic too, but I think that they're not using expensive ordnance like that to hit a apartment building. Either it was mistargeted because of some failure, the system guidance malfunctioned, or maybe it was shot down by air defense and then crashed into the apartment building. This is a propaganda war, so don't get too wrapped into that. That's horrible things happen in all wars. Let's be blunt. So, and the best thing can be done with this one would be to negotiate an end to it as soon as possible, in my opinion, because to me the Ukrainians are taking some pretty heavy casualties. Their manpower is being wasted on these attacks. And it would be much better to try and negotiate a settlement than to continue to perpetuate this thing. But at any rate, and so the naval attacks are going on. Now, on the other hand, our Wagner guys apparently are getting a little action in Niger. They're showing up there and supporting the faction that created a coup. It's trying to kick the French out of there. And this is significant because Niger is one of the primary sources of uranium for the French nuclear program, because remember, France generates most of its electricity with nuclear reactors. unlike any other country in the world. And so that's their primary source of uranium. And of course, other sources would be in the Russian areas like Kazakhstan, and of course Russia itself. Of course, Kazakhstan's an independent country, but they're kind of allied with Russia. So this could give them more control over that energy source. And of course, the Wagner Group is in there training the soldiers for the coup. Well, there's some talk that some of the other African nations are going to organize a force to remove them from power, and that's still pending. But the other thing that's very tricky is I think we have a military unit of up to maybe 1,000 troops in the area that were engaged in anti-terrorist operations, I guess with drones and the like. So that makes the whole thing rather touchy. So we'll have to see how that all plays out. But I guess that may be where a lot of the Wagner people are going to be going to. There was some talk that they'd return to action somewhere around August the 5th, and well, we're a little after that, and by that time they seem to be showing up in Niger. So that's something to keep an eye on, because that would indicate perhaps some horizontal escalation on the part of the Russians, where you try to find another front to create some havoc on. So at any rate, that's kind of a rundown, I guess, of basically what's been happening. The other issue, I guess, I will mention is that the Storm Shadow missiles that Britain and I guess France also, well, they have a different name for it, but I think it's the same missile, has done some damage to some Russian bridges, like I mentioned before. And this missile, I got some information, I believe, from a Indian source that gives some idea. This is a stealthy missile which has a radar cross section of around somewhere between 0.3 of a square meter and a hundredth of a square meter. So, or as they say in the trade, negative 15 dBSM or minus 20 dBSM. So this is a relatively stealthy missile. It also cruises fairly low above the ground. So it makes it very hard for the Russian air defense to intercept it. In fact, this will give them a little experience with stealth technologies, which to see how they can perform against it or fail to perform, and give us some idea too. Now, the real defense that they've apparently been using is the Panzer S system, which is interesting. It's a mobile track-mounted vehicle with a radar system, and it launches short-range missiles and also has a twin 30-millimeter autocannon. So we're basically talking terminal defense. That even if it's stealthy, when it comes down to the final approach, the stealth basically reduces the detection range to the fourth power. And so effectively, when it gets to close range, the radar can then lock onto it and then try to engage it. And apparently they've shot down a bunch of them, but if you shoot enough of them in, one of them gets through and blows a big hole in the bridge. It has a big 1,000-pound warhead, so it's a substantial weapon, and they're being launched by Su-24s. And one source, which I would say is pro-Russian but interesting, is it claims that these things may be being the Su-24s, because remember the Russians have attacked their bases of those pretty heavily with missiles. So how are they still being able to operate? Well, the claim is maybe they're being based out of, say, Poland, and then they basically fly into Ukraine to refuel because of the long distance, and they don't have in-flight refueling inside of Ukraine, and then go ahead and launch their attack and then fly back out. So that they may be housed between missions in Poland, so that effectively they won't be subjected to Russian attack. And we don't know if that's true or not. That was an allegation that a pro-Russian source made, but it is an interesting possibility, which would indicate an element of escalation, I think. This is always kind of a dangerous situation that could go in the wrong direction someday, and we hope it don't. But anyway, that's kind of the way it goes. So as it is, I think the stalemate fundamentally continues, and we'll have to keep up with what happens. But so I'll be posting this also as always on Rumble, my backup channel, and it'll be on my social media accounts below. And I guess I need to quit calling it Twitter and start calling it X. I'm still not sure why Musk changed the name to X, but I mean, if you're going to change the name, that seems to be a strange thing to name it. But anyway, that'll be it for this time.